Hi, this is Alex Traiman here from the JNS Jerusalem headquarters. I literally just came up from a bomb shelter just moments after sirens were heard and explosions over Jerusalem. We're now back in the studio and here with Michal Cotler Wunsh, who is Israel's official special envoy to combat anti-Semitism around the world. And Michal, I know that you're in New York. I want to welcome you to the program.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Tell me why you decided to go to New York when the brunt of the conflict seems to be taking place here in Israel.
So actually, Alex, I'll share with you that it's probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. 3 of my own children are currently in the army. And I went from funeral to Shiva to funeral, burying my very, very best friend's son, burying the children and families of family relations, and going actually not together with my husband because we couldn't both go to funerals that were simultaneous, so splitting up in order to do that. I'm sharing all that because I'm trying to relay the urgency with which coming here was important, even just for a few days, in order to be able to pass on and make accessible the feeling of what all of us who are there understand very well. This is not something that you can understand just intellectually or theoretically. The entire country is mobilized. The entire country is under fire. And as you just mentioned, the war is raging. So thousands, over 6,600 rockets have been aimed at Israeli citizens as we awoke last Shabbat morning at 6:30 a.m. But that has continued. That has not stopped. And people must understand that here too. 6,600 rockets aimed at civilians, aimed at Jews in order to murder them, and being launched from very heavily populated areas in Gaza. That is a double war crime, every single rocket, and we have to make that accessible. We also have to make accessible the importance of understanding that each one of the awful stories that have come out, and we see how quickly those sort of just go by the wayside. We have not even finished burying our loved ones, burned, butchered, raped, murdered, torn away from parents, abducted. The other piece is, of course, the hostages. There are many, many foreign citizens. And I think that the most important thing that I came to relay is not only the sense of urgency that we feel, but the sense of responsibility and call to action for all of those that are not in Israel at the moment. I think that this is an assault on civilization by genocidal, savage terror, and there is a lot of action that can and needs to be taken. And of course, lastly, it is to also show solidarity with the Jewish communities around the world that as this war continues to rage, face threats to their personal safety, to their children's safety, whether in synagogues or in schools, with these days of rages that the very same Hamas genocidal terror organization is fueling with this complete denial or even justification supporting that genocidal terror.
Do people understand really that this is not just a Hamas attacking Israel, but that this is part of a greater global jihad that not only includes Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and various Iranian-backed proxy groups in Yemen like the Houthis and elsewhere, but that it's actually infected Western society, as we saw with protests in France and in England and elsewhere, and even has infected the American academic system and universities.
That is the key. The key to everything that you just said, and basically at the point of intersection between all of them, is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism in its ever-mutating form, from targeting the individual Jew to targeting the Jewish nation state. That is the key to understand that Iran, the genocidal regime of Iran, not the people of Iran, the genocidal regime of Iran, which, just like Hamas, holds its own civilians as human shields and pawns, poisoning and pillaging and doing what it is that Hamas is currently responsible for doing, that important understanding that those proxies of the same genocidal regime in Iran will not just stop in Israel. And this is not just about the state of Israel, and it is not just about the Jews that the Hamas charter is committed to annihilate and to murder. This is about the assault on our shared humanity. This is not going to end with a canary in the coal mine. The entire coal mine can and will collapse if we do not understand, we being all who cherish life and liberty, that it is our shared humanity and life and liberty that are under assault, whether we're in the United States or boots on the ground in Israel. So Israel just being basically the first, but not the last, in what I would call this first Iran war. And it is a war on everything that we cherish, and to make that accessible and to not distance from the understanding that Hamas is but one proxy, and that there are other proxies, as you said, that basically strangle the entire state of Israel on all of her borders. It is a critical understanding that we cannot let go of, that the head of what it is that we are trying to target is with the genocidal regime of Iran, and with just distancing Hamas or leaving, although that's bad enough, because Hamas is, like ISIS, fueled by Nazi ideology. And I referred to the Hamas charter before. That is the Mein Kampf of Hamas, but it's just at the forefront. So there are more proxy organizations, and we have to piece this thing together in order to be able to win.
So tell me who you're meeting with while you're in New York.
So I've had the opportunity to meet with Congressman Richie Torres, who stands incredibly supportive and understanding exactly of everything that we've just discussed. Later today, I'll be meeting with Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, my counterpart in the Coalition of Special Envoys for Combating Antisemitism, alongside with the U.S. Ambassador to the UN. As I said, there are also tangible steps that not only can but must be made, with demands on Egypt, on Qatar, on Turkey, vis-a-vis those hostages that are being held immediately, vis-a-vis the institutions that the UN is responsible for, whether it be the Red Cross, whether it be UNRWA. UNRWA has educated the 2,500 savages that perpetrated these heinous acts, barbaric acts, and UNRWA continues to receive funding, including from U.S. taxpayers and from the UN. And there is no ability to allow institutions and organizations like the International Red Cross, for example, that came out with a very, very soft message. I believe it was only yesterday that they called for the release of all civilian hostages. They can't just call, they have to act. That is their mandate. They're entrusted to ensure that they receive access to all of those that may need medication, to all of those that may need to see whoever that they, are reporting to. That includes the Secretary General of the UN. That includes all of the institutions within the UN that have to demand accountability of organizations like the Red Cross. So there is a lot that can be done. And this is not just a time for condolences and words of support. This is a time for action. This is it. And much like we said, the entire Israeli society is basically deployed, from children to parents to soldiers on the front to the home front command, whether in hospitals or schools or everywhere else that the entire country is in. It is in shelters. When we understand that there are more boots on the ground to this war for public opinion, and that is what we're doing here. Everybody is a change agent in this war for public opinion. We have to understand that this is an unconventional war. It has been raging for decades. It turns Israel into the culprit in a situation where just days after babies were torn from their mothers' arms and burned, the world has turned its attention to what Israel will be doing. It has to be very clear. There is one entity responsible for what we see, what we have seen and will continue to see on the ground, and that is Hamas genocidal terror. It cannot be that there is a false moral equivalency that anybody makes, and anybody who hears that false moral equivalency has to stand up. That is our role and call to action. Everybody on the outside of Israel has a role to play. Everybody is a change agent, and we are going to have to band together, whether it be half of us in the state of Israel and half of us in the rest of the world as Jews, but whether it be non-Jews all around the world that understand that this is an assault on our shared humanity, an assault on civilization by barbaric genocidal terror that will not stop at Israel or the Jews that it is committed to annihilate and murder.
Have you met also with leaders from the American Jewish community?
Yes, I have met with leaders from the American Jewish community. I will continue to do so. I've met with students. I will meet with some university chancellors. I believe, and you mentioned it before, that the universities have become a hotbed for an ideology that actually, the very same ideology that fuels the terror, the savagery that we saw ever since Shabbat morning, that same savagery is now identifying with Hamas. You have in New York City people holding up signs and screaming, "We are Hamas." This has nothing to do with what we believe as could be a prospective peace with the Palestinians. In fact, exactly the opposite. Anybody who supports peace in any way, including with the Palestinians, must absolutely and unequivocally condemn the barbaric actions that we have seen over the last few days. The fact that there are campuses that cannot bring themselves to do that, from top administrators to students on the ground, is something that the United States has to contend with. This is not just, as I said, a war on the ground. This is a multidimensional war. And in many, many ways, this multidimensional piece of it on university campuses and on the streets will dictate what happens in Israel on the ground. The understanding that if we don't clearly, courageously call out and make very, very clear that there is no comparison and that there can be no double standards, just like the United States fought ISIS, just like in World War II, the Nazis had to be fought. This is the type of ideology that we have to be very clear on. There is no ability to tell the state of Israel to fight without being able to actually fight this genocidal terror organization that holds Palestinians hostage, that won't let them use the humanitarian corridor created to let them leave, that actually wins more of the war by holding their hostages too, by holding their civilians too as hostage and as pawns. We have to understand that, and we have to make that accessible, including on university campuses.
How do you think that this jihadi ideology penetrated the university campuses to begin with? Why have young American students, and to a large extent also American professors that are teaching this, fallen prey to this anti-Semitism?
So I say that I think that we're going to have to first win this war. And after we win this war, there will have to be some very deep dive in every society, by the way, Israel included, on how it is that we got here. I have my own understanding, from my academic experience and practical experience, including while I was in Knesset, in how the universities actually enabled this proliferation of ideology that would have never been acceptable just, maybe 10 years ago. The understanding that there is within the university full programs funded by countries like Qatar that has to decide where it is in the history of the world. Because at the end of the day, if Qatar is funding programs, university academic level programs that continue to peddle and to teach and to inculcate the new modern form of anti-Semitism, i.e., the complete demonization, delegitimization of the state of Israel, whether it be calling it, as we know, the 1975 UN resolution, Zionism is racism, or whether from the 2001 Durban Conference against racism turned an anti-Semitic hate fest, turning Israel into an apartheid state. These are long-term processes. They have been raging for years. The 2001 Durban Conference, in its wake, there was an Israel Apartheid Week on every single campus across North America. That's years, 22 years of students, of graduates, of people integrated into the workplace, into Congress. There is going to have to be a reckoning in all of our societies, in all universities, and the beginning is now. The beginning is with the leadership of those universities, first of all, to identify that it is the mutation of this ancient hatred, that today's form of, or strain of that toxic virus is anti-Zionism, is anti-Israel rhetoric on campus, seen or mandated to be allowed as free speech on university campus, but in fact actually representing the same ideology that, as I said before, now legitimates, justifies, excuses, denies, just days after these heinous crimes occurred, their occurrence. That is going to be the reckoning of academia generally. And that is going to have to be the reckoning of entire societies who cherish foundational principles of life and liberty. And I think the world will not go back to being what it was before October 7th, as it did not go back to be what it was before 9/11. I think that the reckoning will have to include the understanding that freedom is not free, and that not all ideas are created equal, and that free speech does not mean the inculcation of violent, genocidal, anti-Semitic hate into students that are rather than learning how to think, are learning what to think on our university campuses.
Well, it sounds like a hefty task. Do you think that that Israel and the Jewish people are up to the task of winning this battle, which is also the diplomatic battle and the battle of narratives, the battle of ideas, and also the greater war? Are we up to the task?
I'll tell you, Alex, I'll tell you that we don't have a choice. And I'll tell you that when our peace and celebration was disrupted on Shabbat morning, we were celebrating Simchat Torah. We were celebrating Simchat Torah, which by the time it actually was celebrated around the world, we, the Jewish people, had nothing. We had no country, no sovereignty, no independence, no army to defend us, no temple, no anything, nothing. We had a book. We had the Torah. On the day that this broke out, this terrible atrocities that came flooding into our awakening celebrations, when we realized that Simchat Torah would never be the same, I remind us that it happened in an intersection where we have all that. We have a 75-year young miracle, the State of Israel, to which we returned after millennia of exile and persecution. We have a defense force that when we say never again right now, it's never again will we not be able to defend ourselves. We have friends around the world that we have to reach out to and make accessible that this is the war of our lives, that if they are committed to that never again principle, then that is a call to action, because never again is a prospective commitment and the time has come. The moment is now. We have no choice because for thousands of years, our people endured this kind of persecution without everything that we have. So we have to look at this moment in time and understand, and in the words of the late Rabbi Sachs, that we have hope, but that hope, as opposed to optimism, requires action and courage. It's not going to happen on its own, and it's not going to happen if we're silent. It requires our action and courage to fulfill our generation's carrying of the torch of Hatikva, of the hope, our national anthem.
Michal Cotler Wunsh, Israel's Special Envoy to Combat Antisemitism. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Alex. Am Yisrael Chai.